Have you ever heard of Howard Allen? Most people haven't. He would break into victims' homes, assault them, kill them just for fun. Here's the story of Howard Allen, the serial killer you've never heard of. For Howard Allen, life was very difficult from the beginning. Born on February 10th, 1949, he was one of 8 kids being raised by a single mother in poverty. Growing up in Indianapolis, Indiana, with his mother being single and very poor, he had to help raise some of his siblings. Allen recalls having to sometimes steal food to make sure that all of his family members were fed for the day. What didn't help the situation any was Allen's mother was a heavy drinker. She would drink throughout the weekends and sometimes not come home to see her kids for several days at a time. She was frequently caught panhandling outside of bars to get money for food and alcohol. By the time Allen was in grade school, he was very far behind his other classmates. He actually had to be enrolled into special education classes to get him caught up. However, all the help that they were trying to give him didn't really do much. By the time he was in 6th grade, he was only reading at a 2nd grade level. One of the special education teachers said, Howard Allen had difficulty processing language and his thinking and decision making would be very concrete. He could also have difficulty understanding the consequences of his conduct and could easily be led. There were several disputes over Allen's mental disability as he scored a 104 on an IQ test. His mother and all of his siblings always said that he had an average intelligence. Allen did get into some trouble during grade school because he was always considered the protector of the family. So whenever one of his siblings was in trouble, he came to protect them. This landed him in the principal's office several times. Some of these instances got so bad that he actually landed in the Indiana Boys School. This was a correctional facility for adolescent boys. During his time at the Indiana Boys School, if Allen wasn't doing something that was deemed appropriate by all the teachers, they would strap him to his bed for hours on end. Corporal punishment was also a thing at this boys' school, so he would regularly get beatings from the teachers there. Eventually, a lawsuit was filed against the Indiana Boys School for all the corporal punishment that they'd been handing out. The lawsuit was successful in stopping the corporal punishment, but the damage to Allen had already been done. Howard Allen's first run-in with the law was a big one. In August of 1974, at the age of 24, Allen broke into an elderly woman's home named Opal Cooper. This 85-year-old woman was home and confronted Allen. Allen quickly grabbed the upper hand, pushed her down to the ground, and began to beat her. The beating that Allen gave Opal Cooper was enough to kill her. He then robbed her of some of her possessions and then took off out of the house. Allen was quickly caught for the crime and sentenced to 2 to 21 years in prison. He was paroled in January of 1985 after serving 11 years in prison. After his release, he got a job at a car wash until his parole was over. His good behavior didn't last long, however. On July 13th, 1987, Howard Allen stopped by Ernestine Griffin's house. Miss Griffin was an elderly woman living alone on the north side of Indianapolis. Allen told Miss Griffin that he was interested in purchasing a vehicle that he had seen for sale. The vehicle that he was interested in actually belonged to Dr. Seaman, who had a dental practice right across the street from Miss Griffin's house. Dr. Seaman and Miss Griffin had been neighbors for many years and actually became close friends. While Allen was speaking to Miss Griffin about the vehicle, he started asking her questions that she couldn't answer. She told Allen that she would reach out to Dr. Seaman and give him his contact information. Allen wrote his name and phone number on a check stub and gave it to Miss Griffin so she could relay the message to Dr. Seaman. Later that day, Miss Griffin made good on her promise. She called Dr. Seaman and relayed the message that Howard Allen was looking for him and had some questions about his vehicle. That evening, Dr. Seaman called Howard Allen back. When Dr. Seaman called, Howard's sister, April, picked up the phone. Dr. Seaman left a message with April to give to her brother. He left his name and phone number for Allen to call him back. April wrote the message on a pack of rolling papers but never gave it to her brother Howard. Police would later recover this note at their residence. Around 10:25 the next morning, Howard Allen stopped at Miss Griffin's house again. He was asking questions about the vehicle again. Dr. Seaman's dental office wasn't open and Dr. Seaman wasn't there yet, so Miss Griffin called him. Dr. Seaman answered. She handed the phone to Allen and they began to have a conversation. However, Dr. Seaman was very busy at the time. He was on his way to a meeting and didn't have a ton of time to talk. Dr. Seaman did ask Allen if he had a job. Allen replied that he worked at the Blueco car wash. A few minutes after the phone call ended, Miss Griffin called Dr. Seaman again and said that Allen wouldn't leave her house. She handed the phone back to Allen. Dr. Seaman and Allen talked again. Dr. Seaman told Allen in an agitated voice to leave Miss Griffin alone and get out of her house. Having a strange feeling about the phone call that he just had with Allen, Dr. Seaman called Miss Griffin again about 10 minutes later. The phone line was busy. He called her again because he thought that was weird and the phone still was busy. At this time, Dr. Seaman Seaman was almost at his appointment, so he decided to go to his appointment. 2 hours later, after his appointment ended, he called Miss Griffin again. The line was still busy. Dr. Seaman knew something was strange about this whole thing, so around 12:45 p.m. that day, he went over to Miss Griffin's house. As he arrived at the house, he found that the door was ajar. When he looked inside, he saw that Miss Griffin's body was laying on the floor. He immediately saw that there was a large knife in her chest. He immediately called the police. When the police and investigators arrived, Dr. Seaman had told them everything that had happened that day with Howard Allen. He told them that there was a person by the name of Howard Allen trying to purchase his vehicle that day. After Allen wouldn't leave Miss Griffin alone, he became a little harsh with him on the phone and told him to leave Miss Griffin's house immediately. Dr. Seaman also told the police and investigators that Howard Allen worked at the Bluco car wash. Police found that Miss Griffin was stabbed in the chest 8 times with a 10-inch butcher knife, and then the toaster was used to beat her in the head. Police immediately went to the Bluco car wash and found Allen there. They took him down to the police station and began questioning him. Allen told investigators that he watched cartoons that morning and then hitchhiked to work. He told them that he hasn't shopped for a car because he's not licensed to drive. Around 8:45 p.m. that night, investigators learned that they found the piece of paper with Howard Allen's name and phone number on it in Miss Griffin's house. Police formally arrested Allen at that time. They actually had a lot more evidence than just that piece of paper. When they brought Howard Allen down to the police station, some of Miss Griffin's blood was splattered on his shirt and pants. Allen was read his Miranda rights and given a polygraph test around 11 p.m. He was then asked to give a formal statement but refused, saying that he was too tired. Investigators let Allen sleep for 10 hours. After he woke up, they read him his Miranda rights again and began questioning him once more. Allen admitted to shopping for the car and striking Miss Griffin in the head but not killing her. Forensics failed to find any fingerprints at the crime scene. However, the house was torn apart. The countertop had been forcefully pulled away from the wall and a drawer had been left open. A broken and bloody toaster was laying in the living room next to where Miss Griffin's body was. The telephone in the living room was off the hook, which was leading to the busy signal when Dr. Seaman called her. The bedroom covers were turned back and the closet door was broken. An empty camera box was on the floor in the closet. Police then went to the Bluco car wash again and began questioning Allen's co-workers. One of the co-workers came forward with a camera and said that Allen had given it to them to hold until he got back. This camera was the same camera that belonged to Miss Griffin. They also found Miss Griffin's wallet on a nearby roof after a phone line repairman was up on the roof fixing the phone line and noticed it. This case has now become a pretty much open and shut case for the police. What investigators didn't know was that Howard Allen had a much darker past than they had expected, and this darkness was slowly beginning to be uncovered. While investigators were wrapping this case up, they decided to look back on some similar cases throughout the area. They found that about 2 months before Miss Griffin's murder, there was another assault in the area. Allen had broken into a 73-year-old woman's house. He began to choke her and beat her. She narrowly escaped with her life. 2 days after that attack, Allen broke into Laverne Hale's house. She was an 87-year-old woman living on her own. Allen attacked her in the same fashion, choking her and beating her. This time, Miss Hale died of her injuries. Then, about 2 weeks after that attack, Allen broke into an elderly man's house. Luckily, the homeowner wasn't home at the time, but Allen got so angry and frustrated that he set the man's house on fire. He then went on to kill Miss Griffin about a month after that. Several witnesses came forward and began to link Allen to all of these crimes. As it turns out, Laverne Hale, the person that he had murdered, was actually a neighbor to Allen for quite some time. In August, detectives came out and finally said that Allen was the prime suspect in 11 other cases throughout the area. Each one of these cases involved a robbery and an assault of an elderly person. In the spring of 1988, Howard Allen was charged with one of the counts of assault and battery on one of the elderly people. He also caught 2 additional accounts for being a habitual criminal. He was sentenced to 88 years in prison on all of those charges. Then later that spring in 1988, he was charged with the murder of Miss Griffin. The jury recommended the death penalty. Howard Allen, now a convicted serial killer, was placed on death row and remained there until 2006. Then, after several years of unsuccessful attempts to overthrow the ruling due to mental instability, Howard Allen was finally successful in one of his attempts. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison for Miss Griffin's murder. Howard Allen died on June 5th of 2020 at the age of 71.